The light clinking of cutlery and the soft murmur of conversation filled Delaney's bistro, a beloved diner nestled on the town's main street. Aromas of freshly brewed coffee, buttery pies, and sizzling bacon wrapped around patrons like a comforting embrace. The diner, with its worn checkered floors and faded red booths, had witnessed countless stories unfold over the years. For Lucas Bennett, today was just another day of trying to keep his head above water. Balancing a tray of steaming plates, Lucas weaved between the tightly packed tables. At 26, he'd mastered the art of smiling through exhaustion. His sandy brown hair was pushed back, and his eyes, kind but weary, revealed the weight of responsibility he carried. Every shift at Delaney's was a lifeline helping him scrape together rent and pay for his mother's growing pile of medical bills. His mother, Sandra, was his world, and keeping her comfortable was a constant battle. Yet, no matter how tired he was, Lucas treated each patron like a guest in his own home. Kindness cost nothing, but he believed it could change everything. He joked with regulars, offered encouragement to weary travelers, and made every child's eyes light up with extra fries or a smile. Today, as he approached a corner booth, he noticed a family of four: a father with salt and pepper hair, a mother with gentle eyes, and two children: a boy with syrup-streaked cheeks and a younger girl, wide-eyed and giggling. "How's everyone doing here?" Lucas asked warmly, nodding at the boy's nearly finished mountain of pancakes. "Looks like you've conquered breakfast." "Best breakfast ever," the boy declared, beaming with pride. The father chuckled and slid the leather billfold toward Lucas. "You've been great," he said, sincerity in his voice. "Thank you." Lucas nodded, taking the bill to the counter. But when he ran the credit card, his heart sank. Declined. He tried again, hoping it was a mistake. It wasn't. Glancing back, he saw the family gathering their coats, still smiling, unaware. In that moment, Lucas felt their vulnerability as if it were his own. He imagined their celebration, the warmth and hope of a fresh start he'd overheard in passing, and he knew what he had to do. Quietly, Lucas covered the bill with his own meager tips. It would mean stretching his budget even further, but he'd make it work. He always did. The manager raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Lucas had a reputation for acts of generosity, even when it cost him. When the family approached the counter, Lucas handed them a receipt marked "paid in full." Confusion flickered across the father's face. "There must be a mistake," he said, stepping closer. "I can call the bank. We'll sort it out." "No mistake," Lucas replied gently. "It's on the house." The mother's eyes filled with tears. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because sometimes we all need a little kindness," Lucas said simply. "Pay it forward when you can." A heavy silence followed, one not born of awkwardness, but of shared humanity. The father shook Lucas's hand firmly, gratitude unspoken but deeply felt. The children waved, the little girl clutching her mother's leg as they left, smiles still lighting their faces. For a brief moment, Lucas felt the burden on his own shoulders lighten. The rest of the day was a blur of orders and exhaustion. When Lucas finally trudged home, his wallet was emptier, and his feet ached, but there was a warmth in his chest that hadn't been there before. He'd done something good, even if it wouldn't change his own reality. The next morning, Lucas returned to Delaney's, ready for another long day, but something unexpected awaited him: a thick envelope with his name scrawled on it. He opened it to find a crisp $100 bill and a handwritten note to the man who reminded us of kindness when we'd almost forgotten it. "Thank you for giving us hope. Here is a start." Lucas stared at the note, emotions colliding within him. It wasn't about the money, it was the reminder that one small act of compassion could ripple outward. He tucked the note into his pocket, feeling its weight like a promise. Whatever came next, he knew he'd keep going, because kindness, no matter how small, could change everything. The envelope felt heavier in Lucas's pocket than it had any right to. Throughout his shift at Delaney's, he found himself touching it for reassurance, a reminder that even the smallest gesture of kindness could come back in ways he couldn't predict. But life's demands didn't pause for warm feelings. By noon, Lucas was back to the relentless rhythm of balancing orders, refilling coffee cups, and cleaning tables. He caught glimpses of the faces around him, some familiar, others new, and wondered if they, too, were quietly fighting battles beneath the surface. When his shift finally ended, Lucas returned to the small apartment he shared with his mother, Sandra. The space was modest, the walls worn and painted in colors that once seemed bright, but had since faded. Sandra's illness had made their world smaller. She spent most of her days in bed, her once strong frame now fragile and weary. But when Lucas walked in, her eyes lit up, chasing away some of the shadows. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice thin but warm. Lucas sat by her bedside and recounted the story of the family at the diner, of the bill he'd paid and the envelope he'd found the next morning. As he spoke, Sandra listened intently, a smile tugging at her lips despite her exhaustion. "You always find a way to give," she whispered, reaching for his hand. Her grip was weaker than he remembered, but it still carried strength. "It's who you are." Lucas swallowed hard, fighting back tears. His mother had always been his compass, guiding him with unwavering love and resilience. She had worked tirelessly to give him a better life, and now it was his turn to care for her. But no matter how many hours he worked, it never felt like enough. The weight of their reality pressed down on him, every waking moment, mounting medical bills, overdue rent, the gnawing fear that he couldn't hold it all together. "I just wish I could do more," Lucas said quietly, staring at the floor. "For you." "You already are," Sandra replied, her voice soft but resolute. "Sometimes it's the small things that matter most." The next morning, Lucas returned to Delaney's with a renewed sense of purpose. He couldn't change the world, but he could do what he could, one act at a time. As the day wore on, he caught sight of a young man lingering near the entrance. The man's clothes were worn, his shoulders hunched against the chill wind. Something about his tentative movements reminded Lucas of himself, of the days when he, too, had felt like the world was closing in. Eventually, the young man stepped inside, eyes darting nervously around the diner. "Excuse me," he said quietly to no one in particular. "I'm looking for work. I'll do anything." Janice, the head cook, shook her head briskly. "Sorry, we're not hiring." Lucas watched the man's face fall, his expression a mix of exhaustion and defeat. As he turned to leave, Lucas's voice cut through the clatter of dishes. "Wait," he stepped forward, meeting the man's wary eyes. "We could use an extra hand today." Janice shot him a look, one that spoke of skepticism, but Lucas ignored it. He introduced himself and led the young man into the back. "What's your name?" Lucas asked, handing him a dish towel. "Omar," the man replied, his voice rough with fatigue. "Thank you. I needed this." The work was simple: washing dishes, wiping down tables, but Omar did it with quiet determination. Throughout the day, Lucas learned bits and pieces of his story: how Omar had been laid off, how he'd lost his apartment, how he'd been living on the streets for weeks. There was a haunted look in his eyes, but also a glimmer of hope, a spark that Lucas recognized and wanted to protect. When their shift ended, Lucas reached into his tip jar and handed over half. Omar hesitated, shaking his head. "I can't take this," he said. "You can," Lucas insisted. "And you will." Tears welled in Omar's eyes as he accepted the money. "You don't know what this means," he whispered. "Just keep going," Lucas said, his voice firm but kind. "That's all we can do." Over the next few weeks, Omar became a regular presence at Delaney's, helping out when he could and sharing quiet meals with Lucas during breaks. Their friendship grew, built on mutual struggle and unspoken understanding. For Lucas, every small act of kindness made the burden feel a little lighter. He often brought leftovers home, splitting what little he had between Omar and Sandra. It wasn't much, but it was something. And in a world that often felt unforgiving, that something was enough to keep him moving. As winter tightened its grip, the days grew shorter and the cold harsher. The apartment's heater sputtered and groaned, unable to keep the chill at bay. Lucas wrapped Sandra in blankets and brewed endless cups of tea to keep her warm. Every night, as he sat by her side, she would ask about his day, about the people he helped, and he would tell her everything. It was their ritual, a way to find light in the darkness. One particularly bitter night, Lucas closed the diner and stepped outside to find a group of people huddled in the alley behind Delaney's. Among them was a young mother clutching a shivering child, their thin coats offering little protection from the cold. Lucas's heart clenched. He knew he couldn't fix their situation, but he could do something. He returned inside, gathering leftover food and hot drinks. As he handed them out, the mother's eyes met his. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "It's not much," Lucas replied, feeling the weight of his own limitations. "It's enough," she whispered. Word of Lucas's quiet generosity began to spread through the community. People he'd never met would occasionally stop by Delaney's, offering small tokens of appreciation: a warm scarf, a loaf of bread, a few extra dollars. These small acts buoyed him. But they didn't erase the challenges he faced. Sandra's health continued to decline, and Lucas worked himself to exhaustion, trying to make ends meet. One evening, as he prepared Sandra's medication, she reached for his hand. "You're doing too much," she said, her eyes tired but filled with love. "I don't want you to burn out because of me." "You're my reason for everything," Lucas replied, his voice cracking. "I'll find a way." But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. Could he really keep going like this? Could kindness alone make a difference? The next morning, a well-dressed man with piercing blue eyes walked into Delaney's. He introduced himself as Gerald Whitaker and asked for Lucas by name. Their conversation began simply enough. Gerald asked about Lucas's life, his work, and why he chose to help others even when he had so little to give. "You have something rare," Lucas, Gerald said finally. "I run a foundation that supports community initiatives, and we need people like you. People who care." The offer, a part-time position at the foundation, was tempting, but fear held Lucas back. He couldn't afford to leave Delaney's entirely. He couldn't risk their fragile stability. "Take your time," Gerald said, sensing his hesitation. "Just know that your kindness hasn't gone unnoticed." Lucas shared everything with Sandra that night, his heart torn. "You've always put others first," she said, pride and worry mingling in her voice. "But don't be afraid to take a chance. Sometimes, the only way forward is to step into the unknown." With Omar's encouragement and Sandra's blessing, Lucas took the leap. It was a risk, but he believed in the power of small acts because he had seen how they could change everything. The transition into his new role at the foundation was anything but easy. Lucas continued working shifts at Delaney's to make ends meet, while dedicating his remaining hours to community outreach. The foundation, which focused on empowering underserved neighborhoods, felt like the chance Lucas had been waiting for, a way to extend the kindness he'd always tried to show. But it also meant long hours, emotional exhaustion, and even less time to care for Sandra. Gerald, true to his word, guided Lucas through the complexities of nonprofit work. Together they organized food drives, provided job training programs, and connected families with resources to get back on their feet. But for all its promise, the work was grueling. Lucas found himself facing situations that left him feeling powerless: families on the brink of eviction, children going hungry despite their efforts, people whose hope was hanging by a thread. "Take breaks when you can," Gerald advised one day, as they packed boxes of supplies. "You can't give what you don't have." But rest wasn't a luxury Lucas could afford. He poured everything he had into the work, often collapsing into bed at the end of the day with aching muscles and a heavy heart. Sandra's health continued to decline, and he worried constantly about not being by her side enough. Guilt gnawed at him. One particularly difficult week, Lucas returned home late to find Sandra awake, her gaze distant. "You look tired," she said, her voice soft but full of concern. "I'm fine," Lucas lied, forcing a smile. "Just a lot going on." Sandra reached for his hand, her touch gentle. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she whispered. It's okay to ask for help. The words lingered. But Lucas didn't know how to let go of any part of the burden. The next morning, he was back at it, splitting his time between the diner and the foundation, stretching himself thin. His friendship with Omar was one of the few things keeping him grounded. Omar had started working more consistently, finding stability with Lucas's support. He often volunteered at the foundation, sharing his own story to inspire others. "You can't fix everything," Omar said one day, sensing Lucas's growing frustration. "But you make people believe it's possible. That's more than enough." The words were meant to comfort, but Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't doing enough. Then came the day that would change everything again. One crisp morning, Gerald invited Lucas to a private meeting with some of the foundation's key supporters. When Lucas entered the room, he felt a jolt of recognition. The couple sitting across from Gerald were the family he'd helped at Delaney's months ago. Richard and Evelyn Evans rose to greet him, their expressions a mix of gratitude and emotion. "It's good to see you again," Richard said, shaking Lucas's hand firmly. "We've been looking for you." Lucas's confusion must have shown, because Evelyn stepped forward, tears brimming in her eyes. "You saved us when we needed it most," she said. "Your kindness that day. It changed everything." The Evans family had been on the brink of losing hope. Richard explained how they had managed to rebuild their lives in large part due to the ripple effect of Lucas's compassion. They'd reconnected with old friends, found new job opportunities, and regained stability. Now, they were determined to give back. "We've been working with Gerald for some time now," Richard continued. "And when we heard about your work here, your story, we knew we had to help." Richard handed Lucas an envelope. Inside was a check for $2,500. "This is for you and your mother," he said, his voice trembling, "to help ease the burden." Lucas's breath caught, and he blinked back tears. He hadn't expected anything in return for that small act of kindness months ago. But here it was, a moment that felt like validation, hope, and relief all at once. "I don't know how to thank you," Lucas whispered, overwhelmed. "You already have," Evelyn said, her smile warm. "You reminded us of what it means to believe in people." That night, Lucas sat with Sandra, the check in hand. He recounted the story of the Evans family, and how their lives had changed. Tears streamed down Sandra's face as she listened. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice breaking. "This is what happens when we choose love over fear." The money helped cover some of their immediate expenses: medical bills, overdue rent, small comforts they had long denied themselves. It wasn't a solution to everything, but it offered breathing room. More importantly, it reignited Lucas's belief in the power of kindness. The work at the foundation became even more meaningful. Lucas pushed himself harder, expanding programs, building partnerships, and inspiring others to give back. But with each step forward, there were setbacks: red tape that threatened to shut down initiatives, families that slipped through the cracks despite their efforts, moments when hope felt like a fragile flame. One day, as Lucas was helping organize a food distribution event, Gerald pulled him aside. "I know you feel like you're not doing enough," Gerald said, his tone gentle but firm, "but you've already changed so many lives. Don't lose sight of that." Lucas nodded, though doubt lingered. The weight of expectation, both his own and others', pressed down on him. He kept going, driven by the knowledge that every act, no matter how small, mattered. At home, Sandra's health continued to deteriorate. Lucas spent as much time as he could with her, reading old stories, reminiscing about better days, and simply being present. One evening she took his hand, her gaze soft but serious. "When I'm gone," she said, "promise me you'll keep living. Keep giving. You have so much more to offer." The words haunted him. He wasn't ready to lose her, but life had a way of moving forward, even when he wanted to hold on. Then, one cold night, as Lucas prepared to leave Delaney's, Omar appeared at the door with a bundle of blankets and a second-hand coat. "You've been helping everyone else," Omar said with a smile. "It's time someone looked out for you." The gesture, simple yet profound, reminded Lucas that he wasn't alone. The community he had helped build, friends, neighbors, strangers, had become family. Together, they would carry the light of compassion, even through the darkest moments. And so Lucas kept going. For Sandra, for the people who believed in him, and for the hope that kindness, no matter how small, could change the world. The days that followed felt like a blur. Lucas continued his dual life, working long hours at Delaney's while dedicating every spare moment to the foundation. But even as he pushed himself to the brink of exhaustion, a sense of purpose anchored him. The community he had helped nurture was growing stronger. Omar's confidence had blossomed, and he took on more responsibility at the foundation, mentoring young men and sharing his story of resilience and hope. Together, they expanded programs to reach more people in need. But even amid the victories, Lucas couldn't ignore the reality that Sandra's time was slipping away. Her illness had advanced, and each day was a reminder of how fragile life could be. He spent every moment he could by her side, reading to her, talking with her, and just being present. The check from the Evans family had eased some burdens, but it couldn't turn back time. One quiet afternoon, as Lucas sat beside Sandra, she squeezed his hand, her gaze clear and focused. "You've done so much," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But you need to let yourself rest too. Promise me you'll keep going, even when it gets hard." Lucas nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I promise," he whispered, his heart breaking. "But I don't want to do this without you." "You won't have to," Sandra said, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I'll always be with you, in every act of kindness, in every life you touch. That's how we keep going." When Sandra passed away a few days later, Lucas felt as if the world had stopped. Grief wrapped around him like a heavy blanket, suffocating and relentless. But he wasn't alone. The community he had helped build rallied around him, offering meals, comfort, and companionship. Gerald was there, quietly supportive. Omar sat with him in silence, a steady presence. The Evans family visited, their own gratitude and love a balm for his aching heart. As the days turned into weeks, Lucas began to emerge from the fog of grief. He threw himself into the work at the foundation, determined to honor his mother's memory. The idea for Sandra's Haven was born, a community center that would offer support, resources, and a safe space for anyone in need. It would be a place where people could find hope, just as Lucas and Sandra had once struggled to hold on to it. Rallying the community behind the project wasn't easy. There were countless hurdles, funding challenges, bureaucratic red tape, and moments of doubt that threatened to derail everything. But Lucas's resolve never wavered. He remembered Sandra's words, the promise he had made to her, and the countless lives they had already touched. And he wasn't alone. Omar worked tirelessly by his side, and Gerald leveraged his connections to secure grants and support. The Evans family continued to contribute, their faith in Lucas unshakable. The day the doors to Sandra's Haven finally opened was one of quiet triumph. Lucas stood at the entrance, watching as people from all walks of life streamed in, children laughing, parents holding hands, elders seeking connection. The walls were lined with photographs and messages of hope, and at the center of it all was a mural dedicated to Sandra. Her image, surrounded by symbols of strength, resilience, and compassion, served as a reminder of why they had come together. "You did it," Gerald said, pride shining in his eyes as he approached Lucas. "You built something that will outlast all of us." Lucas nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "We did it," he replied, looking around at the faces of the people who had become family. "All of us." The months that followed were filled with both challenges and triumphs. Sandra's Haven became a place where lives were changed, where people found food, shelter, support, and most importantly, hope. Marisol, a woman Lucas had once helped during a cold winter night, now ran support groups for survivors of domestic violence. Omar's mentorship programs flourished, giving young men a path forward. And Lucas continued to lead, pouring his heart into every new initiative. One evening, as Lucas walked through the bustling halls of Sandra's Haven, he paused in front of the mural. The weight of loss still lingered, but so did the strength of what they had built together. He felt a presence beside him and turned to see Omar, who offered a small smile. Thinking about her, Omar asked quietly. "Always," Lucas replied, his voice steady. "She's why I started. And why I'll keep going." "You're not alone, you know," Omar said, his voice filled with conviction. "We're all in this together." Lucas nodded, feeling the truth of those words deep in his soul. The road ahead would never be easy. There would always be more people to help, more challenges to overcome. But for every hardship, there would also be moments of connection, hope, and the reminder that even small acts of kindness could ripple outward and change the world. As he walked through the doors of Sandra's haven that night, Lucas felt the warmth of his mother's memory and the strength of the community she had inspired. He would keep going, not because the journey was easy, but because it was worth it. Every life touched, every act of compassion, was proof that light could be found even in the darkest of times. This was his legacy, and Sandra's, a testament to the power of kindness, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of love. And as long as there was a need for hope, Lucas would continue to give, one act of kindness at a time. With Sandra's haven now thriving, Lucas settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. The community center had become a beacon of hope, but it was also a constant reminder of the work still to be done. Every day brought new challenges: families facing eviction, people struggling with addiction, children in need of stability and guidance. And yet, every small success, every life changed reaffirmed Lucas's commitment to the mission he and Sandra had dreamed of. One day, Lucas received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from a man he had once helped through the Foundation's job placement program. "You believed in me when no one else did," the letter read. "Because of you, I have a job, a place to live, and hope for the future. Thank you." The words brought tears to Lucas's eyes. He shared the letter with Omar, who read it slowly, nodding with a mixture of pride and quiet determination. "This is why we keep going," Omar said. "Because it matters." As time went on, Lucas began to see the seeds of his efforts take root in ways he never could have imagined. Marisol's support groups expanded, reaching women across the region who needed a safe place to heal. Omar's mentorship program grew, with young men finding purpose and breaking cycles of poverty and violence. The Evans family, ever committed to giving back, continued to support Sandra's haven, often volunteering their time and resources. Lucas, however, knew he couldn't do everything alone. The weight of leadership was heavy, and he realized that true change required empowering others to step up. With Gerald's guidance, Lucas formed a leadership council at Sandra's haven, bringing together voices from every corner of the community. Together, they strategized, shared stories, and ensured that the center's mission would endure long after any one of them was gone. One particularly busy day, as Lucas walked through the bustling halls of Sandra's haven, a young boy tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Lucas," the boy asked, wide-eyed, "is it true you started all this because of your mom?" Lucas knelt down, meeting the boy's gaze. "Yes," he said, his voice soft but steady. "She believed in helping people, in showing kindness even when things were hard. Everything we do here is because of her." The boy nodded thoughtfully before running off to join his friends. Lucas watched him go, feeling the familiar ache of loss, but also the deep satisfaction of knowing Sandra's legacy lived on. Every child who laughed within those walls, every person who found hope, carried a piece of her spirit. As the years went by, Sandra's haven continued to evolve. Lucas saw new faces step up to lead, people whose lives had been changed by the community center and who now wanted to give back. He found himself taking on more of a mentorship role, guiding the next generation of leaders while stepping back to reflect on how far they had come. One evening, Lucas stood outside the entrance of Sandra's haven, watching the sunset cast a warm glow over the building. The air was filled with the sounds of life: children playing, people talking, and music drifting from a nearby event. Omar joined him, a knowing smile on his face. Thinking about her, he asked. "Always," Lucas replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "She'd be proud, wouldn't she?" "She already was," Omar said, long before all this. Lucas nodded, feeling the weight of Omar's words. The journey had never been easy, but it had been worth every struggle, every setback, and every triumph. He knew there would always be more work to do, more people to help, but he also knew he wasn't alone. In the months and years that followed, Lucas continued to lead with compassion and humility. He watched as Sandra's haven grew beyond anything he'd dreamed of, touching lives he'd never meet and creating ripples of kindness that stretched far and wide. The community became a testament to what was possible when people chose to lift each other up. And as he walked through the doors each day, Lucas carried his mother's memory with him, a light that guided him through even the darkest moments. It was a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, could change the world, one act at a time. This, he knew, was the legacy he had built with Sandra, a legacy of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable power of love. And as long as there was a need for light, Lucas would keep giving, because that was the truest gift he could offer.